We're good.
Hey everybody, it's Fantasy Fools here, Papa Wigs and Wigs, getting ready to discuss our top 60 running backs for fantasy for PPR. We're going to do this just like we did the QBs. We're going to go in reverse order, so we're going to start here with number 60, kind of break down where each of us had them ranked, and then just a little discussion about each of them. So hopefully you guys will find this content useful, just like the quarterback ones that we did. So let's jump on in.
All right. First person is going to be Dameon Pierce of the Texans.
Yeah, so Wiggs and I were really close on this one. I mean, we were only one spot off. So Dameon Pierce, he's an interesting running back this year, in my eyes. Obviously, the Texans, they got Joe Mixon now. So I know a lot of people are gonna think that well, that's gonna reduce Pierce's um, viability in fantasy. Here's my thoughts on it. Obviously, Mixon has been a staple in fantasy for the last several years. He's probably Mr. Consistent when it comes to his stats, not only from a running perspective, but also from a yardage perspective. He's going to be a huge part of the Texans' offense. But I will say that the Texans have come out and said that they plan on using both Pierce and Mixon. I don't think Pierce is going to disappear. I you know I've said this to Wiggs before. I think a lot of teams are starting to look at rotating two backs, not necessarily giving all the reps to one specific back, just because that ensures um, uh, the amount of injuries they might come across, the longevity of a running back, because obviously the running back takes a huge beating during the season. So I think Dameon Pierce is still going to have a role in the Texans' offense. Uh, they have come out and said he's had so far. He has had a really great camp, but I do see him being uh, more of a change of pace for Mixon. I do think that it wouldn't surprise me if they rotate series with them just to keep them fresh, at least maybe at the beginning of the year. To see. Obviously, they're going to give the ball to the hot hand. So I think if Mixon's having a great game, you're probably going to see more Mixon. So, but don't dismiss Dameon as a potential flex option in fantasy, depending on you know who's out on your team. Because I still think that he has value, and that he could um, you know, give you some points when you least expect it, during the season. So that's my take. And, I know last year he didn't have a great year. They had Singletary. I think part of that was is because Singletary came out, I think, and he actually kind of had a breakout year, I think, with the Texans. And he was a little bit more productive, probably because of his running style. But I do I do think Pierce has still got some value. Wiggs.
It's hard for me to judge his value now here with Mixon on the team because, like you said, Mixon's been Mr. Consistent running the ball and even receiving the ball. And for me, I kind of see like Pierce's production maybe going down a little bit. Maybe not anything crazy, but I don't know if I'd go as far as them rotating series, but I could totally see him being like a third down type back and letting Mixon cut and do the bulk of the work there on first and second downs. But from a value standpoint in a fantasy league, I think, a flex option possible from Pierce or at least a backup running back. And you never know. Things happen to running backs, and for all we know, Mixon could get hurt early. So I wouldn't blame anyone for taking Pierce in the later rounds of a draft.
Right. And listen, in a 12-man league like what we do for PPR, most teams are, depending on how you value running backs, most teams are going to carry anywhere from 4 to 6 running backs on their team. So um, it's not far fetched to see him going in the draft uh, and stuff because especially in the lower rounds because you never know when a running back's going to get hurt and so to me he still fits in there as a draft candidate based on how you value running backs.
Yeah, and I think if he's like a third down back, that's still got some value there because Stroud's really good about getting everyone the ball. So for all we know, he could have a few great like games this year with like hardly touching the ball. So you,
Yeah, I kind of compare him a little bit, not maybe running style, but to like Jared McKinnon on how the Chiefs used him. I think that I could totally see Houston using him in a Jared McKinnon type of role, which wouldn't surprise me at all. So, and as you know, any of you guys that have followed McKinnon, you've seen what he did the last couple of years with the
yeah,
Chiefs. So, all right, so now we move on to number 59 here.
it's going to be Deontay Foreman of the Browns.
Yeah, so this one, Wiggs and I were a little bit farther apart on this in our rankings. Um, but I will say this about Foreman. Um, uh, Last year with Carolina, no, he was with the Bears last
Bears,
year.
yep.
So last year with the Bears, he didn't have as productive year as he did with Carolina the year before. I think partially because I think there just was a lot more depth. So like last year he only had 425 yards and four touchdowns in in the rushing game, and he didn't really have a he had one receiving touchdown, but he didn't really have any value in the receiving game. I think his production went down because the Bears just had a lot more depth last year at running back. They had, Herbert and Roshan Johnson, their rookie. I think that it just, if looking back at it, he probably kind of regretted moving, but it is what it is. That's what happens when money talks. This year, though, I can see him having, yeah, I had him ranked lower, but given the status of Chubb with the Browns, um, I can see Foreman at the beginning of the year potentially having some red zone value because of his size. Uh, I think that Ford is going to get the majority of the carries because, really, in all honesty, I don't think Chubb's going to be starting off the season. Maybe he'll surprise me, but coming off his second ACL, I think the Browns are going to take him slow. They're going to ease him back in. It wouldn't surprise me if he ends up on the pub at the beginning of the year and he doesn't play at least the first four games. So, with that being said, obviously Ford had a great year last year, and he's going to be the guy, I think. But I do think Foreman does have some red zone value because of his size and his running style. I also think that he's, someone that can be a good change of pace guy that they could bring in. So I definitely think he's draftable. In a bench guy. I don't really see him as a flex guy. I more so see him as a bye week replacement maybe, or someone that can go in there if there's an injury, if something happened to Ford for some reason. Obviously that's gonna give Foreman some more upside.
Yeah, he did get into kind of a rough situation there in Chicago because he did have a lot of running backs to compete with there, and for the most part, all three of those running backs last year, I would say, are about equal in their performance throughout the entire year. Looking at it, he only made 9 games last year of the 17, so I don't know if the injuries impacted his year significantly at all, but maybe a little bit, maybe not a lot, but
I don't know that he was active all their games
I don't
either.
think he started the year off active. I think it was trying to let's see here, pull
Yeah,
it up.
we don't have to
Yeah, we don't have to go that deep into it, but I I don't know. He just doesn't sit well with me right now. I think I might even rank him a little bit lower now that I'm seeing where I ranked him, sitting at 56. But I do agree with you. I think he'll be like the two guy behind Ford to start off the year because I don't think Chubb will start the year off. Again, he could surprise us, but I don't think Chubb will. But I think as soon as Chubb comes back, Foreman's just going to be in there when they feel like putting him in there. So for me personally, I wouldn't draft him just due to the fact that he's got competition ahead of him that, in my eyes, are better in Ford and Chubb. And once Chubb comes back, that role is just going to slowly deplenish. And he might not be bad to have on the bench in case Ford or Chubb gets hurt, but
Right. No, I agree with you. I think, and I think it comes down to how much you value running backs, right? Everybody has values positions differently. If you're somebody that likes to carry six running backs on your team, um, in a 12-man league, you may consider them. If you're somebody that only likes to carry four running backs, you probably aren't going to consider them. So I think it kind of all depends on your personal preference. So, but I do agree with you. That I mean, he's on the fence on whether he gets drafted or
yeah.
not.
Move on from Foreman. Got his old teammate and Khalil Herbert.
Yeah. So Herbert is he's an interesting one for me. Um, this year the Bears went out and they brought in Swift. And they have I think Herbert's number two on the depth chart. I'll be honest with you. I think Roshan Johnson is going to surpass him in the depth chart. That's just my opinion. I think Johnson um, is going to make an impact in training camp. That's going to put him behind Swift. I like Johnson. Um, I know that he didn't have a great year last year, but I still think he has some value. Now Herbert did he did have 600, a little bit over 600 yards last year. Wasn't really a TD guy. He wasn't really that active in the passing game from a yardage perspective. He did have some 30 reception or 20 receptions last year. So for a running back, yeah, that's you know, like 1.5 receptions a game, maybe a little bit less. So I had him ranked a little bit lower than Wiggs on the ranking. I'm not as high as Herbert. I really think that he's gonna. I think his production this year is actually gonna go down. I think the only way his production goes up is if Swift gets hurt and he's out, and they have to rely on Johnson, and obviously um, they're gonna look at Herbert then closer. I believe, like I said, I think Johnson leapfrogs Herbert, so that's why I had Herbert lower, and I also think that um, I can see the Bears, rotating a little bit, but I think it's going to be between Swift and Johnson because I think they're going to want to try to keep Swift healthy because Swift has had some issues in the past with injuries. So, just my opinion. What do you think, Wiggs?
I think that Johnson and Herbert are going to be used roughly the same. I actually have them, I believe, ranked one spot apart from each other here. I have Johnson just slightly edging out Herbert, but I could see them kind of both just rotating when they go in behind Swift because I think if anything, they're probably going to be more so a third down back type of running back. In my opinion, you might see Johnson in there occasionally, just relieving Swift, but um, I personally think those two are going to have about the same usage, and I think they're going to be utilized both pretty well in the passing game because I think there'll be a nice little safety net there for Williams whenever he needs to just drop it down to a running back or a tight end or something like that. They'll always kind of just be there, and they're both pretty solid receiving backs. So.
Yeah, Swift's pretty solid in the receiving game too, though I believe. So, but yeah, no, I agree with you.
But you know the Bears, they like to run,
Yeah,
several running backs. So
yeah.
Tyler Allgeier.
Yeah, so this one was a kind of a hard one for me to judge this year because um, I think Tyler was lucky with the coach and the staff that he had last year at Atlanta. I really do. I'm not taking anything away from this kid. I think he's showing he's got talent, but let's be realistic here. Bijan Robinson is probably going to be a top 3 running back this year for sure. I think that Bijan was grossly misused by Atlanta last year. He was not as involved in the offense as he should be. And I think with the new coaching staff this year, I think that's going to completely change. So, does that mean that Tyler's not going to have some value? I think he'll still have some value. I don't see him getting 680 yards this
No,
year.
not
That's
even
just
close.
that's just my opinion. I see him potentially being a weapon that they may use in the red zone. So I could see his touchdown production being maybe around the same as 4, possibly a little bit higher. Because these coaches like to get creative down in the red zone, and I could see them using them down there more. But I think that Bijan is going to be the guy this year. How do you not? I mean, I'm not saying he's going to be out there every series, but I think Bijan is going to be getting 80% of the carries, if not more, on Atlanta this year. So I really think Tyler's production is going to go down. I think obviously in fantasy you always have injuries. So if something happens to Robinson, that's gonna make his value higher. If that happens, but to me, um, again, he's definitely not a flex guy in my eyes, and me personally, I probably wouldn't draft him, but um, that's just me. I can see why other people would draft him if depending on how they value running back. So Wiggs.
Yeah, I wouldn't draft him either. I'd actually not even look at him or blink because I think Bijan's going to be heavily used this year. I could see him being like a 3 down back. I think Tyler's production will kind of be like Elijah Mitchell from the 49ers. Like you're hardly going to see the guy on the field because Bijan is kind of just like CMC. Like he's able to run the ball really well. He can catch the ball really well. Like he's just going to be out there. And with Kirk Cousins as Robinson's quarterback, like he's going to get the ball in the receiving game. Allgeier definitely could get the ball in the receiving game. Kirk Cousins did like to utilize Madison when he was on the Vikings, so he'll still get the ball and get the touches. But for me, like it's just not enough with someone like Bijan, who's on the team, who is easily going to be a top 3 running back. He's kind of like Christian McCaffrey and Brees Hall, can run the ball and catch the ball really well. So
Yeah, and he had 186 rushing attempts last year, I believe that
yeah,
was. I, Listen, that's like 11 carries, almost 12 carries
yeah,
a game. Um, I just don't see that happening this year. Arthur Smith, to me, was one of the most frustrating coaches and play callers last year, especially in fantasy, because Arthur seemed to think that he could just plug anybody in there and they were going to be effective. And he just didn't seem to want to get the ball in the hands of his playmakers, um, which is why I think the Atlanta is going to be a sleeper team this year because I think their coaching staff realizes the talent they have, and not only that, they've got a quarterback in Kirk Cousins who's going to be out there on the field, and he's going to get the ball to the people he needs to get the ball to.
yeah. And looking at Bijan's carries last year, he only had 30 more carries than Algier, which
Yeah,
is nuts.
which is crazy. Yeah, I don't understand that.
But to move on from that, yeah, I don't understand that at all. Speaking of the 49ers, Elijah Mitchell.
Yeah, so Mitchell to me is going to be a non-factor unless
Yeah.
something happens to McCaffrey. He only had 75 attempts last year. He was non-existent in the passing game. He only played in 11 games last year, and part of that was due to injuries. Again, he's got to stay healthy. But you know what, McCaffrey is just such a big part of that offense, and they use Debo in the running game as well. I just don't see Mitchell, um, you know, uh, being as involved. I probably have him ranked a little bit higher than I should. Looking at it now, I definitely don't. I definitely don't think he should have been 51. I probably should have had him ranked closer to 60. So the only thing that he's got going for him is, McCaffrey can tend to deal with some nagging things during the year, so there could be some games that McCaffrey's not in, or they want to limit his carries or something. So I just to me he's nothing more than a potential maybe bench player, if that. I probably wouldn't draft him myself.
Yeah, I wouldn't draft him either. And like you said, he's really only going to be out on the field if McCaffrey's being limited or if McCaffrey's like out. Because McCaffrey has been hurt in the past, and it totally could happen again with how much he's out on the field, touching the ball, receiving it, like all of that. So I totally could see an argument for Mitchell being in a better spot than Algier just due to the fact that the 49ers have a ton of weapons, and I could see them up by a decent chunk of points in certain games and then giving McCaffrey the ball a little bit less and just having Mitchell out there so McCaffrey doesn't get hurt. But um, I think that's the only upside he's got because someone like the Falcons, in all honesty, I think a lot of their games are going to be close because I don't think their defense is fully there. So I kind of like where Mitchell fell. Now, for me, Mitchell and Algier would probably be behind